I'm here to welcome you to the capstone event in our Winter 2010 speaker series. These events are made possible by the National Archives and Records Administration, our parent agency, and the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, our primary partner in non-government support. And with us tonight, our Library and Museum Director, Elaine Didier, and the Executive Director of the Gerald Ford Foundation, Joe Calvaruso. Our audience tonight also includes a very distinguished special guest and personal friend of our featured speaker, and I welcome Ambassador Katsuhiro Shinohara, former ambassador to Cambodia from the government of Japan. This April marks the 35th anniversary of the month that President Ford remembered as the darkest, the worst of his presidency. Cambodia, Laos, and South Vietnam had fallen to communist insurgencies. The fate of Cambodians under the Khmer Rouge would become one of the great tragedies of our lifetimes. And here at the Ford Library, our archives from this era has left some, I guess, indelible impressions on me as I work with the materials from that era. I remember, for example, the deafening silence in a staff meeting as we sat and we watched a network news videotape from days before Phnom Penh fell. And the silence was because we were all thinking about the fates of the people in the street scenes of the news broadcast. I remember some fellow archivists telling about the chill they felt when in our vault they found a satellite surveillance photo of the city of Phnom Penh days after it fell. The streets were deserted. It meant that the people had been driven out of the city to rural labor camps. I remember finding a memo that President Ford received a year after the fall of Phnom Penh, and it outlined the scope of the Khmer Rouge horrors as gleaned from refugee reports and other sources. Well, tonight's speaker, Suchan Siv, gives voice to that era, but also it's an inspiring journey, a voice to the inspiring journey of hundreds of thousands of people, refugees from Indochina, who since then have become our neighbors, our co-workers, our fellow citizens. Ambassador Siv has worn many titles. In Cambodia, he was a native son, a relief worker, a slave camp prisoner, an escapee. In Thailand, a prisoner again, then a refugee camp worker. In the United States, an apple picker, a taxi driver, a student, a U.S. citizen, an assistant to President George H.W. Bush in the White House, U.S. representative to the United Nations with the rank of ambassador under the second President Bush, and not least the author of a terrific memoir, Golden Bones. For me to tell you more is to tell poorly a harrowing yet hopeful story that belongs to him and that you need to hear from Ambassador Siv himself. It's my pleasure to present Ambassador Suchan Siv.
Thank you very much, David, for the kind introduction. I'm glad you left me something to talk about myself. I'm very happy to bring some sunshine for you from Texas. And I'm happy to leave some of the sun with you when I leave tomorrow. As David mentioned, I'm very delighted to have my old friend, Ambassador Shinohara. We've known each other for a long time when we were young and innocent. Ambassador Shinohara is one of the few people who has seen Cambodia at peace, Cambodia at war, after the war, and now back to help Cambodia. And I have not met many people who have been devoted so much to one single place where he called a second country. In fact, we are going to go back to San Antonio together, and then we'll go on from there to Japan, where my wife and I will be honored to be invited to his daughter's wedding in Kyoto. So this is quite a celebration for all of us. I'm standing in front of you with great pleasure and enormous privilege on this full moon night, March the 29th, 2010, to reflect on a journey that we're going to take together. We're going to take a golden journey back in time and space, 35 years back into the past and 9,000 miles from Arbor to Cambodia, to the 70s, to the 60s, to the 50s. In fact, in order to help us with this presentation, I'm going to show you some slides, and you have here. This is the main airport in Cambodia. I was born less than a mile from this airport, and in the middle you recognize my wife, Martha. She was being welcomed by Cambodian officials. This is a place when you enter Cambodia by plane, you'll go through my village. That's the main international airport. So I was born less than a mile from here, and in the 50s, it was a very happy memory, happy childhood. I learned about the foreign dignitary visit when Vice President Nixon came to Cambodia in 1953. And he and Mr. Nixon spent one day at Angkor Wat, which is now the world's largest religious monument. I had a very happy family. My father was a police chief. My mother was a doting homemaker. She taught us the values of caring and sharing. But in 1957, when my father passed away, our family life changed from a middle class family to a level of subsistence. I was the youngest boy in the family, so I was the official mourner. I was the official mourner, meaning that I had to shave my head, and I had to sit in front of my father's coffin, being paraded around the village so that people could pay respect. And if you ask me the question, why do I have such a short haircut, that because I did this in honor of our military who served in the Vietnam War, and also during that period of time in the 70s, in recognition to the great service they did for our nation and our freedom. So 50s was interrupted by my father's death in 57, but my mother continued to give us all these values. She told me that no matter what happens, I must never give up hope. No matter what happens, never give up hope. So this wisdom remained with me the rest of my life. The 60s was a year of eye-opening for me. The most important festival in Cambodia was the Water Festival, which they had boat races that date back to the 12th century to 1177. That was when the Cambodians had a major naval victory on the Great Lake. And this is the only festival where all the people from the villages came to Phnom Penh to cheer and to support their teams and their rowers. These boats have about 60 to 80 rowers, and it was quite an amazing scene. Then I went to high school. This is Sisawat, which was like the Phillips Academy of Cambodia, the top high school. I was there for my secondary education. And this is a classroom I was in 1966. And to 2008, I went back to the same classroom. The colors of the walls at the main remain the same, a little bit faded. So I was, the principal was at the left. He introduced me to the classroom, and I told the student, I was in your seats in 1966, perhaps before your parents were even born. Those were the years I learned about the world, about the United States. I knew the names of every president from George Washington to Johnson. I knew the names of the state capitals, the longest rivers, the largest lakes, the highest peaks. I can recite it backward and forward. Those are years where I spent a lot of time in the library, and my favorite one was the USIS library, the United States Information Service Library, which was attached to the US Embassy. I read Hemingway in French, I read Robert Frost in French, and I just realized that, my God, this is quite a country. This is where everybody seemed to have all kinds of means to create and to invent things for the goodness of life. So the person who played a very important role in Cambodia was King Sihanouk. He was a young high school student in 1941 when Franklin Roosevelt was at the White House. The French decided to pick him up, to choose him to be the next king when his great-grandfather died. Cambodian monarchy is not hereditary, it's elective. It's chosen by the Crown Council. But in 1941, Cambodia was part of France, so the French chose him, who was at that time considered as a playboy. But he turned out to be quite an annoyance to the French because he got independence from the French in 1953. All the presidents since Eisenhower met with King Sihanouk. I think the first one was Eisenhower and then Kennedy, and then later on Reagan and Bush. I think President Ford and Jimmy Carter didn't have a chance to meet with King Sihanouk. President Nixon met with him when he was vice president. I got the news from the United States directly when my brother came to Huntsville, Alabama in 1973. At that time, Cambodia was already at war. The Vietnamese, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, who had occupied Cambodia, the eastern part of Cambodia, to use as sanctuaries for rest and recuperation, logistic centers. They broke out of those sanctuaries. They began to attack Cambodia in 1970. Within weeks, Viet Congs and the North Vietnamese were able to shell the capital of Phnom Penh with artillery rockets, 122 millimeter rockets. The Cambodians were trying to fight off the Vietnamese communists, and the United States was very helpful in getting the government moving on, and my brother was sent to Huntsville, Alabama in 1973 for specialized military training. He sent postcard to me, and he ended with these 5 words. He ended his postcards with these 5 words. This is a beautiful country. So that was my first direct connection with the United States. I was growing up in the French system. I spoke French, and my dream was to go to Paris to be a student at the Cité Universitaire and walk around in the Boulevard Saint-Germain and so on and so forth. But history changed. This is a very interesting photo. This was a picture of President Ford in 1975. The Khmer Rouge already came to power. And if you go to my website, you will see an op-ed piece I wrote in the New York Times called Last Breakfast in Cambodia. That when I describe the chaotic scene of the days before the Khmer Rouge came to power. On April 10, 1975, President Ford, in an address to the nation, said that for Cambodia and South Vietnam, the options before us are very few, and the time is very short. When I heard that statement over Voice of America, my heart sank. 2 days later, the US Embassy was going to be closed. I was at my office. I was working for CARE at that time, and I was in charge of all the relief program. And an officer at the embassy came to my office and told me that I ought to be at the embassy within an hour if I want to be airlifted out of Cambodia. That was April 12th. 2 days after the president announced in that address to the nation. I said that I had to go to a meeting with the governor of a province where we had programmed to help 500,000 refugees and displaced persons. These are the people who fled the countryside and seek safety and shelter in the capitals and in provincial cities. We used to transport rice, medical supplies, and clothing on the road, but the road had been cut by the Khmer Rouge. So I thought that by going to the meeting, I would be able to save the life of those refugees. I decided to go to that meeting. When I finished, I came to the embassy, and I was told that the last helicopter had taken off 30 minutes before. So I missed the US Embassy helicopter by 30 minutes, and my life changed. 5 days later, on April 17, 1975, the Khmer Rouge came, and they turned the society upside down. They forced everybody out, and that included 25,000 hospital patients. Many of them were pushed out on the hospital beds with IV still dripping. 3 million people were forced out from Phnom Penh and the capital and the other provincial capitals. My family, which include my mother, my sister, my brother, and their children, 16 of us left that day. We were forced to the countryside, and we went to the southern province of Takeo, which is the birthplace of my father. 2 weeks after the Khmer Rouge evacuation, I was able to leave because I knew that my presence would put everybody in my family in danger. I spoke English, I spoke French, I worked for an American organization, I wore glasses, which is a sign of education. Everybody would be killed by the Khmer Rouge doctrine. I threw away my glasses, and my mother told me to run. And no matter what happens, never give up hope. She gave me a scarf and a bag of rice. So I left my family with my mother's scarf and a bag of rice on a bicycle, and with my mother's wisdom. No matter what happens, never give up hope. I rode a bicycle for 3 weeks from the southeastern part of Cambodia near Vietnam to the western part toward Thailand. I couldn't go to Vietnam because Vietnam had fallen to the communists 2 weeks after Cambodia. So my hope was Thailand, 500 miles away. I faked passes and used false excuses. I was able to go through the Khmer Rouge checkpoints. And suddenly May the 12th in Cambodia, which is May the 13th in Cambodia, which is May the 12th here, I heard over the loudspeakers blasting propaganda materials. They said that they just captured an imperialist, capitalist boat, and they're going to take some very drastic measures. Later on, I learned that it was a Mayagas, which is a merchant ship on the way from Hong Kong to a Thai port. President Ford, having seen the retreat from Vietnam and Cambodia, was not ready to have the America's resolve tested. So he ordered the U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Coral Sea, and a few destroyers in the area. And I was really puzzled because I realized that the Khmer Rouge were really dragging Cambodia into hell, not just by forcing everybody out, but trying to stand up to the United States because they became so arrogant. But later on, as you've seen in history, the crew was released. So that was the last time I heard of the United States. It was a total blackout for a year. For 1 year, I was somebody else. I changed my identity. I was a truck driver. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't speak of anything. When I went to sleep at night, after an 18-hour day of hard labor, I never knew if I would be alive the following day. When I woke up, I realized that I was still in Cambodia and still alive. I said that I would make it to Thailand and to freedom. So my mother's words rang in my ears, never give up hope. I made it close enough to Thailand, but I was captured near the Thai border. They tied my arms behind my back and they were going to kill me that night. But a truck driver saved my life. He was in a small town in the northwest part of Cambodia called Sichan. This is the railroad station of Sichan. The town was already completely deserted. Everybody was living in communal area. We had to build our own houses and so on and so forth. But Sichan was a major strategic city because there were two highways that merged there before it got to Thailand. So anybody who was seen or caught near Sichan would be killed. But I was lucky. A truck driver saved my life. He told the Khmer Rouge that I was an innocent person, that I was looking around for my family. He saved me the second time when I damaged the truck because I had no glasses, so I couldn't see very clearly. It was a rainy night. I drove the truck off the road. The Khmer Rouge came and asked what happened, and he said that it's a very minor incident. It takes a few moments to fix it. So once in your life, there was somebody who showed up from somewhere. You didn't know him, he didn't know you, but he did it out of the goodness of his heart. So I continued to work under the Khmer Rouge, just like the whole country. It was a huge labor camp, and Cambodia became a land soaked of blood and tears. Soaked with blood and tears. There were only two kinds of people under the Khmer Rouge: those who had died and those who would die. And I said I would not be part of this. And my mothers never gave hope, were there with me. In January 1976, the Khmer Rouge were looking for a crane operator. I raised my hand, I said I was a crane operator. But I'd never been in a crane in my life. So what I did, I burned small candles, I pulled a blanket over my head, and I began to study the instructions. This is a major risk, because if I got caught reading something in English, I would be killed. But I was able to do that, and I was able to operate the crane successfully. This is Route 69 on the way to the border, because the Khmer Rouge were going to use the crane to pick up timber along the Thai border. And I knew that it would increase my chance by being closer to Thailand. So during the subsequent trip to the border, I was able to study the land area. And I found out that the shortest distance was somewhere between the timber pickup point and the nearest village. I must be able to jump on the truck right there in the midpoint. On February the 13th, 1976, I was alone at the back of the timber truck. I could not jump to the left because the Khmer Rouge, the driver would have seen me through the rearview mirror. I could not jump to the right because the Khmer Rouge soldier who came with us with an AK-47 would have seen me through the rearview mirror. What I did was I crawled on top of the timber all the way to the back of the truck, and I dropped myself behind the truck. I was caught on a piece of lumber, and I was dragged for a few hundred yards before I was flung off. I picked myself up, and I began to run, to walk, to crawl, to swim for 3 days, having nothing to eat or to drink. I fell in a booby trap, which is a deep hole full of punch sticks, sharp bamboo sticks. They were going to catch the unlucky victims at the stomach or at the heart. But I'm very tall for a Cambodian, so they hit me in my legs, and that saved me. I pulled myself out of that hole, and I began to limp along until I got to Thailand. In Thailand, I was jailed for illegal entry because I had no paper. Then I wrote a letter to a friend of mine who was my Japanese teacher in Cambodia. He came to bail me out, and I was transferred to a refugee camp. This is an area the size of a soccer field. There are some 3,000 refugees families living there, they suffered severe mental depression. It was hot, filthy, humid. Many of them sat around all day feeling sorry about the past and worrying about the future. I said I would do something to help them out, so I organized English classes. It was a win-win proposal. Many of them were going to go to a third country, an English-speaking country like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom, or the United States. So they were able to learn some English before they would go to their adopted country. At the same time, they were able to take their minds off the sorrows and the worries. On June 4th, 1976, I arrived in Wallingford, Connecticut. This is where I was teaching English in a refugee camp. And then I became a Buddhist monk. I was ordained a monk in Thailand because in a Buddhist society, we believe that every male had to become a monk for a certain period of time. This is like a rite of passage. From the king to the peasants, they had to be a king. Ambassador Sichan was a monk in Cambodia too. Then on June 4th, 1936, I arrived in Wallingford, Connecticut with $2 in my pocket, my mother's scarf, and an empty rice bag. I was exhausted, I was sick, I was tired, but I was full of hope. I told myself that I must adapt to America so that America would adopt me. In French, it sounds even better. S'adapter et se faire adopter. To adapt, to be adopted. I did everything that came my way. My first job was picking apples. I picked a lot of apples. I ate a lot of apples, enough to last for a lifetime. I still like apples. And then I went to work for an ice cream store, Friendly Ice Cream. I was supposed to be trained to be a manager, so I had to learn everything about the store. I had to sweep floor, cook hamburgers, scoop ice cream. I never seen a hamburger in my life. And suddenly I was hearing rare, medium rare. I was holding the lettuce, and the trainer said, "Hold the lettuce." It took me a while to understand that she didn't want me to put the lettuce on a hamburger. Then when I was at the cash register, I was quite confused. I saw the dimes smaller, but worth more than the nickels. I said, wow, this is very difficult. So I decided to move on. Next stop, New York, New York. I stood at the street corner of Manhattan, and I saw all these huge yellow cabs coming down 7th Avenue. Sign in the back, taxi drivers wanted. So I called, and they asked me to go and take a test. It consisted of directions. How do you get from the Waldorf Astoria to Yankee Stadium? I had no idea where these places were, much less how to get from one to another. So I just checked the boxes. When I finished, I came back to the examiner and I gave him the sheet. He looked at the boxes, he frowned. He looked at me, he sighed, he shook his head, and he said, "You passed." So I became a taxi driver. In 1977, you did not know how to know where you were going. You didn't need to know where you were going to drive a taxi. All you need was a strong horn and good brakes. And I was amazed that New Yorkers could communicate in sign language. Sometimes in just one finger. But I kept doing everything that came my way to the best of my ability. I applied to a number of schools. They turned me down because I had no transcript. I had no transcript. So Colombia, the Dean of School of International Affairs asked me to go and see him. And I prepared, you know, like all of us, when you go to an interview, you try to be prepared. But he asked me one question that I wasn't prepared for. He said, why do you want to spend 2 more years learning everything that you already knew? And I was caught off guard. And I struggled for a few seconds. I was going, I'm going to spend the rest of my life here, so it's important for me to have an American education. The dean smiles, and he stood up and he thanked me for going. And he said, we'll call you. This is the answer that you want to hear when you go and interview. Don't call us, we will call you. But the following day, I got a call from one of the deans. He said that we found a scholarship for you, and that you could start this semester, which begins next week. And he added, if you are free tomorrow, why don't you come for the orientation? And I said, wow, this is amazing. So I went to Columbia School of International Affairs. I did a Master of International Affairs. In 16 months, when I finished, I went to work on Wall Street briefly, and I continued to do everything, like I said, to the best of my ability. And finally, it was 1988. Of course, there was an election. 12 years earlier, I was in Connecticut in 1976. I was watching the conventions on TV. And I didn't understand what was going on. I saw these people wearing funny hats, jumping up and down the chairs, screaming, shouting, yelling. And my host finally said, this is a convention. These are delegates. They are going to choose a nominee, and all of us will elect one of the 2 nominees. And then they turned to me, they said, Sichan, if you wanted to understand this country, you should get involved. So my chance to get involved was 1988. I volunteered for the Bush campaign in New York. And then when Bush got elected, he asked me to work for him at the White House. When I walked in to work at the White House on February the 13th, 1989, it was exactly 13 years from the day I jumped off that truck in Western Cambodia, northwestern Cambodia. When I sat down after being sworn in, I couldn't believe that somebody like me, who was running through the jungle of Cambodia 13 years earlier, was now sitting at the White House working for the President of the United States. That was a great tribute to the President and to America itself. For the first 3 years, as you recall, the world changed. The Soviet Union fell apart, Eastern Europe became free, the Berlin Wall came down, and for somebody like me to sit there and look at history being shaped in front of my eyes, it was quite overwhelming. When President Bush left the White House, I returned to the private sector. When George W. Bush got elected, I was asked to work for him at the UN as an ambassador. So this is the first time I met President Bush as vice president. It was July 13, 1988. And I never knew that a few months later I would be working for him. That's President Reagan signing a proclamation. And on January 20th, he was sworn in, 41 was sworn in. And that's my office at the old executive office building, and now called the Eisenhower building. It's room 128 for Don and Joe, who might remember, on the first floor. And we have the staff meeting every Tuesday. I was in Geneva chairing the US delegation to the conference at the United Nations with Deputy Secretary of State Larry Eagleburger. And this is a very historic meeting. This is when President Bush met with the Polish-American leaders, because the Polish-Americans were concerned about the new Germany. They were concerned at the border, so we invited them over to meet with the president. And in 1992, while I was at the White House, the United States decided to send a delegation to Cambodia. because we had played a key role in the peace process. We signed a peace agreement in Paris in October 1991, and the United Nations was going to send the largest peacekeeping operation to Cambodia with 22,000 personnel. So the United States, being a largest contributor to this operation, we decided to send a delegation. I was invited to go along. I was able to go to my father's village. And this is where I almost died on April 27, 1975. If you read Golden Bones, I would encourage you to read it. On this floor, in this room. And I return and I invite some monks to do the blessing for my mother, my sister, my brother, and their children who were all killed. 16 of us, I'm the only survivor. 15 of them were killed, not too far away from this temple. So I was wearing my mother's scarf, which is now in our home in San Antonio. I was making an offering to all the monks there at the temple. There was an American monk from Indiana, Anderson, Indiana, who was there, and I invited him to be part of it. And when George W. Bush got elected, he asked me to become a United States ambassador. United Nations is a very interesting place because we have sort of triple responsibility. We co-founded the United Nations in 1945, and Roosevelt and Churchill decided to go along and form an alliance of democracy to fight the Axis powers. We are the host country, the host country, the UN. New York is the largest diplomatic community in the world. And third, we are the largest benefactor to the United Nations. So for an American ambassador, especially for me, when I walked in, people looked at me. My fellow colleagues, my fellow delegates, my fellow ambassadors from 191 countries, they looked at me. Through me, they saw you. They saw America. They saw its promise. They saw its opportunity. They wanted to hear what I had to say. When I said, on behalf of the President of the United States and the American people, that was my proudest moment. So I will continue to do that for 5 years. In 2005, that was my last General Assembly, and that was the 60th anniversary of the United Nations. In January, my wife, Martha, who had been with the World Bank since we moved to Washington, she decided to leave the World Bank. And I decided to leave the United States government also. I have been gathering quite a lot of gray hair, so it's time to move on. So we decided to move to Texas, where my wife is from. We moved to San Antonio, and she bought me a laptop, which was sort of a message. Maybe this is the time for me to put pen to paper. For 30 years, since I arrived in America in 1976, each time I introduce myself, people ask me, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? I was reluctant because I knew that it would take me through all these painful memories. My mother was killed, my sister, my brother, my neighbors, my friends. The whole country was a huge killing ground. But as I continued to travel around the country and around the world, the question persisted. And I said, maybe this is the time to put pen to paper. So it took me 7 months to finish the manuscript. During that 7 months, I was able to go to Cambodia with Martha, my wife, twice. And in one of the trips, we were at the at the dedication of the U.S. Embassy in Cambodia. And you recognize the gentleman on the extreme right of the screen. You probably recognize your speaker. You see this gentleman right here? On the right, that's me. I was incognito. Just kidding. So after that dedication ceremony, the embassy gave us a major reception. We had a picture with the Marine and so on and so forth. And then we called on the king, the new king, who is the son, the youngest son of King Sihanouk. I introduced Martha to him. And then the second trip we were invited by the government of Thailand to participate in the 60th anniversary of the coronation of the King of Thailand. He is the longest reigning monarch in the world, 60 years. Just imagine being in the same job for 60 years, that's a long time. But 60 is a very good number for Asians because that's the end of the 5th cycle. We believe that life is divided into a cycle of 12 years each. The most important anniversary is the 60th anniversary because that's the end of the 5th cycle. From there, from Bangkok, we flew to Cambodia. I wanted to find the truck driver. I thought that maybe my book would not be totally complete if I could not find anything about the truck driver who saved my life twice. We spent 2 days looking around in northwestern part of Cambodia, and we finally found 2 of his sisters. The 2 women on the left side, those are the 2 sisters. The truck driver passed away in a car accident. He lived until 2001. So I thought that maybe I have closed the loop. So I wanted to end the book, but I didn't know where to end it. Should I end it at the White House, which was like the pinnacle of my career? Or should I end it in New York, where I went as a taxi driver and left as a United States ambassador? Then on July 4th, 2006, our friends in the Texas Panhandle invited us to be part of the celebration in a small town called Canadian, Texas. Canadian, Texas had a very long standing tradition of having rodeo and 4th of July parade since 1888. It was sort of major capital of railroad and cattle in 1888. They started out and it's continue on. But this time, our friends told me, you ride in the parade. You will ride in the parade this time. So Martha was in a wagon pulled by 2 enormous mules named Bonnie and Clyde. And I was on my regular mount. We assembled on the high school ground, and we went to town through the courthouse, and I was able to stay on the horse until the end. In the afternoon, I was escorted into the rodeo grounds by 2 cowboys on horseback, of course, one carrying a Texas flag and the other one carrying a U.S. flag. What they call the grand entry. At night, we went back to the rodeo grounds, and we watched the fireworks. That is when I said to my wife, this is a beautiful country. That's how I ended my book, with these 5 words. This is a beautiful country. Thank you very much.
Our country is experiencing a lot of budget crisis as far as the money is very tight, and I've heard people say we shouldn't be spending money for foreign aid. And I've given them my reasons why I think it's important, but I thought it'd be interesting to hear your perspective of, do you think we should be providing foreign aid to other countries, and if so, why?
This is a very good question. I am, of course, for foreign aid, but I would have to admit that it's not the quantity of money, it's the quality of money. And George W. Bush, not known to many people, he was the one who announced the increase of foreign aid by 50% in March 2003, when he decided to create the Millennium Challenge account. This is the money of about $15 billion to be given to countries that have made 3 commitments. 3 commitments only: good governance, sound economic policies, and investment in the people, in health and education, in children and women. So we let the countries or potential recipients do their own program, and the first recipient was Madagascar. And I happened to be in Madagascar the few months before they were eligible, and I was quite impressed with what they were doing. The president at that time was somebody who came from the private sector, who knew how to make good use of the money. So I'm for the foreign assistance, but it's not so much the amount of money, it's the quality of money, how the money is spent that is important to us. And we are a very compassionate society. I'm proud to say that the United States is the largest donor to all humanitarian assistance programs, what I call from cradle to coffin, from children to aging and anything in between. Children, women, HIV/AIDS, food crisis, refugees. The United States is at the top, followed of course by Japan, which is a major benefactor to all the humanitarian assistance programs. So we should be proud of what we have done, and we should be also very mindful of the fact that there is no free money anymore. Everything has to be earned. Let me show you a few more slides here. I ought to tell you that the first time the White House invited anybody to talk about anything else but policies was before, just a few months before the book came out. The White House decided to invite me to make a presentation on golden bones. And there I was on May 9, 2008, just 2 months before the book came out. And of course, I talk about volunteerism is also as well, because George Bush, the father, once said, any definition of a successful life must include serving others. And then I began signing books, and the highest number was 500 copies in Annapolis. So I have my own Indy 500. And I went through the military. San Diego is a big military city, so I went to Randolph Air Force Base, and these young officers, and I'm very proud to be part of their reading club. And the most heartwarming part was a trip to Cambodia, when Cambodians, many make only $100 a month, and they came with their children to hear me speak, to get a copy of a $20 copy of book. So this is a family that she brought all her children to have a picture with me. That is very heartwarming. And Golden Bones cover, this is the paperback cover, which is different than the hardcover, but it has a quote from President George H.W. Bush. This is the only and the first quote ever given by 41. And when you look at this photo, you are tempted to ask the questions: who, what, when, where, and why? Who is it? It's Suchan Siv. What is he doing? He's praying. Where? At Angkor Wat, the world's largest religious monument. When was it? It was in March 1992. That's when I mentioned earlier, I went to Cambodia. I went to my father's village. And the villagers knew that I had survived the killing fields, that I was working for the President of the United States. And they said, "You're truly a person of golden bones." Basically, Cambodians call somebody who's very blessed, very lucky, a person of golden bones. I think we are all people of golden bones because we are blessed, we are very lucky. And the last question was, why was this photo chosen among hundreds? That is because, to me, it symbolizes what is important about life. It's about faith, about family, friends, and freedom. Faith, family, friends, and freedom. So next question.
I have to apologize. I don't know much about the history of Cambodia. Did the president stay in office during the period of the Khmer Rouge? I mean, was that, did they leave the president alone during their time period?
Cambodia is a monarchy, so there was a king.
Or a king.
There was a king. No, King Sihanouk was ferried away. He spent most of the years in China, and the Khmer Rouge came, and as I said, they turned the society upside down. And if you have time, you should go and check out a movie called The Killing Fields, which came out in 1983, which is quite a telling story, although it's a little bit undertone. because what really happened was even much worse than what you saw in the movie. Yeah. You have time for another question? Or? Yes?
Okay, what is the political situation in Cambodia today, and then how do they relate to the neighbors like to Thailand and Vietnam and so forth?
I call Cambodia a flawed democracy. A flawed democracy. There have been an election every 5 years since 1993. And Ambassador Shinawatra spent a number of years there during the elections, after the elections, and he saw everything on the ground with the clearer pictures. It's a little bit more stable, but there are still a lot of problems, domestic issues, like crime, corruption, injustice, impunity, and so on and so forth. But the country is moving along. In terms of relation with the neighbor, you probably read quite a bit about a temple, a 10th century temple along the Thai-Cambodian border. This was settled in 1962 in The Hague, an International Court of Justice, and The Hague, the court gave it to Cambodia because it was built when Cambodia had the control of the entire territory in the 10th century. You're talking about the 10th century. And now, since the temple was inscribed into the World Heritage Site, the Thai government has used that as an excuse to create some sentiment of nationalism. Both governments are using that to benefit for domestic consumption in a sense. But Vietnam, they have good relations, and Laos also. So I think they are moving along, but they need to address all those domestic problems. Ambassador Shinawatra just founded an NGO to help promote education in Cambodia. I was a teacher myself, so I think that quality teachers and secondary education are very important. So I'm very happy to help in any way I can to help those teachers who make $30 a month. They make less money than a bus driver. So sometimes they have to take bribes. They have to take money from the students so the student can have extra classes. It's a very sad situation. In the classroom, I showed you earlier, I asked some of the students to show me on the map, on the world map, where the United States and Cambodia were, so that I could tell them how far I traveled. They could not find it on the map. This is in major contrast to my years, where I was able to recite the names of the president from Washington to Johnson. And I was very sad. So we hope that with this effort, we will be able to improve the teachers' training as well as the secondary education, along with the higher education in Cambodia. Yes, how much time do we have, David?
We have 3 more.
3 more questions. Look, let's start on the right, and then you move this way. Yes.
I lived in Cambodia during the Vietnamese War, and then the Cambodian king wanted the Americans to get out because he was sure that there was going to be a problem as a result of being there. That's when we moved to Thailand.
You mean the Khmer Rouge, not the Cambodians? You live in Cambodia during the Vietnam War?
Yeah,
That was 70 to 75.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, when the Khmer Rouge came, they forced, of course, they killed a lot of foreigners. They killed Cambodians too.
Yeah, well, we went over to Thailand.
Yeah,
That was better.
yeah.
They had us schooled by them, like kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was stuck in Cambodia there for a year, so I got out, and I went to Thailand as well. Next, I think I saw a hand here, yes.
Would you encourage Americans to go to Cambodia as tourists?
Oh yes, yes. There's some 1 million tourists every year, and the best season to go is probably November to January when it's cooler. Cooler meaning it's 65 degrees instead of 105. I take my wife there once a year, and it's a beautiful country. And Ambassador Shinawatra spent 14 years of his career there, so he can even tell you more from a different perspective. The last question.
If the questioner could deliver the question via the mic?
Yes, I should have repeated the question, sorry.
Who do you think contributed most to wider career? The dean at Columbia University or the guy that said, okay, you can pay taxes?
That's a very good question. Can I borrow the book a second? Thank you, Elaine. Let me read this for you. I mean, some author read some section of the book. I read the acknowledgement. And read the acknowledgement for you. This will answer question. The greatest blessings in life are having a loving family, having wonderful friends, and having good colleagues. I have been lucky to have all of them. They helped me write this memoir. In fact, everyone whom I came across has had a role in it. I'm thankful to have met these good people. Some are mentioned in this book, others are not. Many have died, some in tragic circumstances. My mother and my sister and brother and their families who were killed, the army sergeant, the fisherman, the truck driver who told me to stay on the road, the mysterious monk who counseled me to follow the sun and the moon to find freedom. I owe all of them an eternal debt of gratitude. And those who trusted me by giving me jobs, from the apple orchard supervisor in Connecticut to the taxi examiner in New York, and to President of the United States. I thank them profoundly for the opportunity to live the American dream. In between, Harvey Picker, Dean of Columbia University School of International Affairs, admitted me to the program, and Helen Maguire Muller offered me a full scholarship. So you need to read this. Thank you very much.